It was another busy day at Dale DX. Longwood is a town of 205 people located on the state's main highway. By all accounts, the place was about to succumb to an influx of big box stores that would put me out of business. But it was still generating enough profit to keep the wolves at bay, pay my employees a decent salary, and put some money in the bank for a rainy day. I had a regular clientele of locals and an endless stream of hunters and fishermen. Before owning Dale's, I worked with my father for over 15 years in the medical equipment trade, a fairly lucrative field. And when he died, I thought I could take his place, representing half a dozen or more companies. In their collective infinite wisdom, I wasn't old enough at 34 to know what I was doing, despite the fact that I had been doing the lion's share of sales for the last 7 or 8 years. After all, as my father said many times, just follow the money. There were deals being made behind closed doors that I could have spent a lot of money challenging. Since my mother was gone and my brothers and sisters were gone, I decided to hell with them and the ship they came on. I sold everything that could be sold, including my parents' house, my apartment, and the building my father built for work over 30 years ago. I didn't leave with little money, but I didn't leave poor either. Since my parents' office building and house are located in prestigious areas of the city, they brought in a lot of money, so my house was sold at market value. I saved a few pieces of old furniture that I wanted, 3 generations of antique china that had passed down to my mother from her mother, and I auctioned off the rest, including their 2-year-old caddy. Considering that I could buy a 7x12 dual-axle enclosed trailer for a little more than double what it would cost to rent, I decided to buy the trailer and then hit the road. 7 hours later, I turned onto an old logging road that led to our hunting lodge west of High Ridge, a town of about 1,800 people. When I arrived, it was well past noon, and I had enough daylight to unpack the essentials, turn on the lights on the stove, water heater, and furnace, turn on the water, and unhook the trailer. I checked the record tank and decided to call to have it filled the next day. The tank showed 30%. But I didn't want to forget and use up fuel. It was late autumn, which meant the days were pleasant, but the nights were chilly. I didn't have room to store everything in the house. There were no rental stores in High Ridge, so I headed south to downtown Lake Junction County to find rental storage space. Lake Junction was home to the county courthouse, sheriff's department, and regional hospital. After driving 43 miles to Lake Junction, I had to pass through a small town called Longwood. A sign on the outskirts of town said the population was 205, mostly old houses, a few new ones, a tavern, and not much else. I drove through town for years when we went hunting, and until the DX gas station grocery store came downtown 9 years ago, the blue and white sign still hanging out front was the original China. When the owner died, no one wanted to buy the business. It was empty after his death. His children owned it, but they lived 6 states away and never came back to Longwood after they graduated from high school and moved away. On my way home, I stopped at the log cabin in Longwood for lunch. The older waitress recognized me and sat next to me, and during our conversation, I asked about the old station. She told me about something the kids owned and wanted nothing to do with it, but couldn't seem to get it to sell. She had the impression that it was overpriced. Over the next 2 weeks, I was able to find out the phone number of my older brother, a tough lawyer from the South. He didn't want to go north, so I told him I'd go south. A day and a half later, I was sitting in his office, drinking coffee and chatting. When I started talking about selling the establishment, he threw out a ridiculous number. I laughed at him. "You don't want to sell it, do you? This property isn't worth nearly what you're asking for." He glared at me. "No one has the money to buy this dump anyway, so who cares? I'll continue to write it off as a loss every year." I leaned forward. "How much would you sell this for if you could get cash? No fuss, no fuss, no checking, nothing but a title search and a receipt once the search is complete." I think he thought I was blowing smoke up his ass because he laughed in my face. "I guess you're going to try and tell me you have that kind of money." I stood there wondering if I should tell him to go to hell, but instead I leaned over his desk and said the number I had in mind. He leaned back in his chair, blinked a few times, stuttered, muttered something under his breath, and stood up, holding out his hand. "It's a deal, mister. I want half today and the rest after the title search is complete and the legal paperwork is completed." Now I was angry. "Fuck you. 10% down, which is normal for serious money, the rest after finishing the rest. Like it or not, I'm leaving home tomorrow morning." I was just about to close the door when he shouted, "Wait, come back. Get out your checkbook. 10% and I'll start the paperwork tomorrow." From that moment on, everything else was completed using electronic signatures. 3 weeks later, I sat in the title office and completed the transaction. And a week later, I had the document in my hands. There was once a gas station, a small grocery store, a small auto repair shop, and, in the 50s, a Dodge dealership. At the time of the old man's death, only the front of the store was open. No one had been in the back of the business for ages. At closing, I was presented with a set of over a dozen keys. The title company didn't know what they were for, and I damn near threw them away, but decided against it. I was walking around the place, figuring out what was trash and what could be salvaged, when I came across a heavy metal door with the largest padlock I had ever seen. Heading to the truck to get a set of keys, I tried key after key with no success until I found the second to last one. The lock clanged open, and I walked into the Americana Museum. There were gas pumps from the 50s and 60s, an old Dodge pickup truck, what looked like a Model T on blocks hidden in a dark back corner, a dozen or more balls for the top parts of old petrol pumps, and then in the small room at the back, the most exciting find. 2 visible glass pumps in good condition, one with a Texaco top, the other with a Phillips 66 top. Next to them sat a Model 38, a vintage Sinclair Globe gas pump. On the shelves, which were mostly rotted away, were old wheels, old wide white rubber tires, shelves of old parts, and a vintage brass Brunswick cash register. I was so excited I could wet my pants. I valued what I could see on the surface as worth what I paid for the place. If his smart kids had done a little homework and didn't think their old man was crazy as fruit pie, they would have realized it was a gold mine. Then I made the decision that I was going to reopen this place. I was going to start small and build it up. The first wave of realism hit me 3 days later. Early snow fell just over 5 inches thick. I made the decision to install a plow on my F-250 as soon as possible, and 6 days later, as I drove out of the lot, I thought to myself, let it snow. At least now I had the opportunity to take it out. I spent the first 6 weeks going through and cataloging everything, deciding what I wanted to keep and what to auction. I found an antique car parts store online that was willing to buy original Dodge parts, most of which were still in the boxes. They, in turn, bought rims, one of the 1950s gas pumps, and 2 globes. People in town initially thought I was crazy for buying what they called a dumpster, until word spread that it had been sitting in backyard storage for decades. On the day of the auction, there were over 300 bidders registered on site. By the end of the day, after paying commissions to the auction houses, I had still collected more than I paid for the property. Shortly after I discovered my gold mine, a hotshot lawyer suddenly wanted more money, claiming that I had defrauded him. I hired a lawyer, no less famous than him, and everything was done within a week. Slippery idiot. He's had years to look at this place and decided not to. In his eyes, his old man was a fool for living in this provincial town, the same one in which the lawyer was born. As December approached, most of the construction crews and artisans in the area were expected to be laid off until the spring. I took advantage of this and hired the people I needed to completely gut, rewire, replumb, and remodel the front of the store. In the process, I had a small apartment built behind the office, large enough to fit a bed, shower, small kitchenette, and sitting area. I could stop sleeping in the cottage and spend my days in the shop as soon as it opens again. The old man switched to fiberglass tanks 2 years before he died, so I didn't have to replace them. I installed new digital model gas pumps and covered them with a canopy. With a completely new interior and the latest technology regarding pumps, I opened a store on the 15th of March, selling gasoline and some groceries, bread, milk, feminine products, cereal, chips, mostly general merchandise. I was waiting for a cold beer license and was told I should have it by May. For many years since the old man died, the common thinking was that Lake Junction was 30-odd miles away, and High Ridge was a little less than 20 in the other direction. No one would want to stay in Longwood. They were wrong, with locals, diesel-hungry logging trucks, and countless hunters. I had no problem keeping the doors open. I opened at 6 and closed at 9. I did everything myself. By the 6th week, I realized that I would need help to keep up with everything. So I put a sign on the door that said, "Part-time help wanted," and left it at that. The lady who had filled up several times and bought milk several times asked if I was still hiring after paying for her fuel. I nodded yes. "My name is Iris. I worked here until Horatio died. Everyone knew him as Harry anyway. I worked for him for 5 years. I'm only 52 and have a lot of courage left in me, but I'm tired of commuting to Lake Junction. I think you might be interested in this." She was not difficult to look at by any stretch of the imagination. Her face looked middle-aged, but it was still fashionably made up, just enough to highlight without looking tacky. I figured she was 5'6" or 7" and probably 140 pounds, with a narrow waist along with that soft slope to the hips that comes with being a mommy. I thought she had a nice ass that looked firm in her casual jeans, average breasts, maybe a B or C to match the rest of her body. Yes, I could work with this every day. I grabbed onto her offer like a chicken on a June bug. "When can you start, Iris?" She smiled and winked. "I'll be here tomorrow at 6 to help open. But don't you have to give notice about where you work?" "No, I told him to do it today. He thought he could touch and do whatever he wanted. Some girls put up with it to keep their jobs. I told him to take a leap, you stinking pervert." True to her word, I heard a faint knock at 5:45 the next morning. Having Iris on hand to help with inventory, cleaning, and register management allowed me to stay on top of inventory and paperwork. Since Iris finished work at 6 every day, I still closed at 9, which exhausted me. One morning, Iris asked if I could hire someone to do closing so I could come to my house at a decent hour. I would still be there if anything happened, and I could close at night as usual. "Your wife can't be happy when you're here 15 hours a day, Dale." "I don't have a wife. I've had a few long-term relationships, but my previous job wasn't conducive to family life. I'm still single. Not that I wouldn't mind having a wife, but then who needs a 34-year-old guy as a groom for newlyweds?" "What did you mean about closing?" "My 21-year-old grandson goes to Junction Technical School until 2, comes home around 3 and is looking for a part-time job, but wants to stay close to home. What would you think about teaching him? He's honest and smart, wears his hat like, and you're supposed to, his ass isn't sticking out of his sagging pants, and he'll be there on time. Did I mention he's 6 foot plus? Not a lot of people mess with him. Hiring Todd was one of the best moves I made. I was able to leave the main floor for 5 to 6 days most days and didn't have to work every weekend. With my beer license in hand, I set up a row of beer and cold drink cases along the wall. I opened up the rest of the front section and installed a cappuccino machine, 3 digital coffee machines, and a wider range of products. I had no desire to compete with the local diner. I spoke with the owner, and she saw no reason why my selling custom-sized pizza would affect her loyal following. By midsummer, it was time to implement the next stage of the Dale DX project, a small kitchen with enough space for pizza preparation, as well as a built-in refrigerator and freezer. I can now store small amounts of fresh produce, cheeses, bacon, simple items like this, and add extra containers for pop and juices. Iris and I were pseudo in love with each other, flirting and making bold statements to each other. There was a sexual tension between us that couldn't be denied. On Friday morning, everything came to a boil. The early crowd came and went, the other 2 employees were busy in their stations, and I was on my knees stocking items behind the counter next to the cash register. When I stood up, I found myself face to face with Iris, who had just approached, our faces only 3 inches apart. Looking into each other's eyes, it was obvious to both that there was something more going on than flirtatious play. We quickly moved away from each other, looking a little embarrassed. Over the next week, we tried to avoid each other, feeling awkward, trying to be nonchalant when in fact we were a bundle of nerves when we had to work together. On Friday afternoon, I talked about the trip to Lake Junction the next morning. Iris immediately asked if she could come with me. When I stared at her, she said loud enough for only me to hear, "I will behave myself." This is followed by a passionate wink. I spoke no louder than she did. "What if I don't want you to behave?" Iris smiled, patted my chest and said, "Then I won't." She turned and left. As she was finishing, I called out from the office, "I'll pick you up at 8. We can go to the diner for breakfast before we leave town." Breakfast was quick and simple. Scrambled eggs, toast, bacon, and coffee. On the way into town, she did most of the talking, and it seemed more nervous chatter than anything else. We did our shopping, bought everything we needed, went to lunch at a Mexican restaurant she liked, and headed home. Our conversation on the way home was more substantive. Iris talked mainly about her ex-husband. He was a truck driver who was also a Don Juan. Said it took her years to figure it out, and when she did, she took every penny she could get from him. When I dropped her off at the house, I helped carry her bags and commented on how something smelled delicious. "I made a beef, carrot, and potato roast in the slow cooker before you picked me up this morning, and I can imagine how it was so tender that it literally melted in your mouth. Why don't you have dinner with me, Dale? I'm tired of eating alone. Say, at 5 o'clock? I nodded and left. After unloading my junk, I wondered if I should change my clothes and look a little more presentable when I went out to dinner, deciding that would be a good idea. I showered, shaved, changed into nicer casual clothes and went to Iris's. She must have had the same idea. Her hair was freshly styled. She didn't wear makeup during the day, but she did it then. She was wearing a bright red cotton dress with yellow flowers and sandals. As good as Iris looked on the outside, I found myself wondering what, if anything, might be underneath that dress. I helped her clean the kitchen and wash the dishes before we moved to the couch in the living room. By this point, the tension of passion between us was almost palpable. There was no denying that we were both thinking the same thing. It was Iris who took the bull by the horns and broke the ice. "Okay, Dale, you want to be a gentleman and not pushy, but it's obvious that we both want the same thing. We're horny, and we want to make love without commitment or consequences. I'm not looking for a relationship, holding hands, or telling everything to the world that we're in bed together. No pats on the ass at work, no secret glances, no whispers in the hallway, no secret flowers delivered from a fan and the like. I'm a 52-year-old woman with needs. You're a 36-year-old man with needs. I don't have diseases, and I'm damn sure I can't get pregnant. Why don't we stop beating around the bush and please each other?" I was curious. "Are we going to kiss, or just have sex?" "Straight to the point. I like this, Dale. I like kissing, but you don't have to. I think it adds intimacy. It's all up to you." I pulled her towards me and kissed her gently. Iris was a good kisser. Soft, full lips merged with mine. Her hand on the back of my head pressed me to her lips. I lifted her chin. "I don't have to kiss, but I like to kiss. I want there to be a certain level of intimacy, not just two animals breeding. I don't need a relationship to respect you, and I certainly don't want... You thought we somehow belonged together if we slept together. Next question, do you want to do things here or somewhere else?" Standing up, Iris took my hand and pulled me up. "In my bed, at least for the first time. After that, anywhere in the house. And one more thing. When we finish, everything is over between us. No longing, no blues, no despondency. We have fun. And when it's all over, we smile and leave. In 2 weeks or 2 years, the rules will remain the same. Do you agree?" I smiled as I pulled her down the hallway. "I agree." I took off my shirt when she turned her back to me. "Unzip me." Pulling the dress off her shoulders and down, I was pleased with what awaited me, an ordinary woman who seemed to radiate sensuality in her light blue bra and colorful lace cotton panties. They were quite free. I reached up to caress her breasts through her bra, leaning in for another kiss. "Do it right. Take off your bra." When her bra fell to the floor, I was happy with her breasts. They were in good shape. I looked at the areolas. They were a nice, round, light brown variety, measuring at least 2 inches across. Pushing away, Iris told me to get rid of my pants and underwear. Sitting on the bed, I could not take my eyes off the most perfect woman I had ever seen. The hair was long and thick, but the V-neck was not very wide. Her breasts stuck out. Gently taking me by the ears, she guided my face forward towards her legal breasts. Iris held my head tightly to her chest. We made some very tough love, which left us exhausted. When it was all over, she flopped forward on the bed, looked around, and reached out for me to lie with her. She fell asleep when I stroked her face and hair, and 5 minutes later she opened her eyes and reached out to kiss me. This went on for almost a year, during which time she flew to Kansas City to meet an old friend, whom she said she would probably sleep with, but would force him to wear a condom. Iris also told me that I should contact a recently divorced waitress at the diner, who confided to Iris that she really needed to make love, but she didn't know anyone who would keep her mouth shut. I told her to give you a try. She's not looking for anything more than a 1 or 2 night stand. She's moving in 3 weeks and is so horny she's about to go crazy. I told her not to do anything stupid with a local who will show off on the whole city. She will most likely call you. Which is what she did. We dated twice before she had to leave and Iris came home. Upon returning from Kansas City, role-playing games were no longer so exciting for Iris. She liked making love, and that was all that was required of her. We christened every room in her house, several times, and every room in the store, including the built-in refrigerators. For some reason, screwing it in the freezer didn't appeal, even the super-quick whipping up. Iris let me know when she was excited, speaking so only she and I could hear. Mommy needs a treat. Our time in each other's bed was coming to an end, and somehow we both knew it. There was no awkwardness between us that night. After we finished our extended hookup, we made love and slept and made love and slept all night in 3 different positions. This was something we rarely did. When the morning came, we both knew it was over. Iris smiled and patted me on the cheek and said thank you for giving her a ride that she never thought she would have at her age. The next day at work, everything was as usual. We got along like it never happened, knowing what it was and how much we enjoyed our sex scenes. Every now and then, Iris would smile at me, come here, and I would smile back, shake my head, and walk into the office. I first noticed the young lady on a Saturday morning, her and her little girl, who I assumed was 4 or 5. After she left, I asked Iris if she thought the lady might be a tourist. No, not a tourist. I believe she is the person hired by the county to oversee the Forestry Museum and welcome people to the hospitality center with maps, points of interest, and of course, the old plants department. Who knows? Maybe she is the one who finally tamed your unruly ways. I'm damn sure not. I don't think so, Iris. She looks pretty young. She's probably supposed to be in her 20s. Longwood was a thriving logging town in the late 1800s, when lumber barons' company clear-cut 300- and 400-year-old trees to supply timber for a rapidly growing immigrant nation. No one knows why, but an area of just under 9 acres of old growth was completely bypassed. The trees in this area were at least 300 years old. The rings were counted on one of the largest trees after it was knocked down by strong winds. They counted 417 rings. Aside from sportsmen and campsites, this stretch of old forest has drawn more people to Longwood than anything else. There was a large hospitality center, a museum with old tools and memorabilia, paths for people to walk through the forest, a rented hall, and a job where a new lady was hired to look after it all. The following Saturday, she stopped by again, this time for milk, bread, and a box of tampons. I've done enough sales that women are no longer embarrassed when they buy women's products. She looked to be in her late 30s or so. She is about 5 feet 9 inches tall, slim but not bony, beautiful hips, an ass that suits her build, long legs, and, as I guessed, breasts of 32 or 34 centimeters. A pretty face, but long. I noticed that she wore her hair on the sides of her face to cover her high cheekbones and thin face. I decided to try to break the ice. Good morning, is that all? No answer. A simple nod of the head, She took the change, her purchases, and left. I thought to myself, well, that was just great, as I turned to the next customer. I hadn't seen her for several days, and wrote her off as a failure. She clearly had no place in her life for anyone other than her daughter, which I could easily understand. It was 2 weeks later, on Friday, when she stopped by for fuel. I made a second attempt. "Good evening. Tell me, where is your little girl?" If looks could kill, why do you need to know where my daughter is? Are you some kind of pervert? My face grew cold and I forced myself to breathe more slowly so as not to hit her in the face. Standing straight, I looked into her eyes. "No, I'm not a pervert, as you so ugly called me. I was just trying to start a conversation. That's what people in business do with regular customers, try to be friendly." Her behavior changed, but only slightly when she handed me $50. "If it's so important for you to know, then she's with her grandmother tonight. And don't bullshit me about keeping up the conversation. You're a player and I don't have time for such things. Guys like you." I was confused. "You don't know me from Adam, but you somehow know that I'm a player. Where did this piece of selfish wisdom come from?" Grabbing the change and placing her hand on her hip, she practically spat out the words, "A man your age, single and never married, nothing more than a gambler. Save the conversation for someone else. I'm not interested." Iris was right behind me when the lady left. She patted my ass and whispered in a snotty tone, "Maybe she's not the one to tame you after all. Who the hell needs that kind of treatment every day? By the way, if your hormones start getting the better of you, call me. I wouldn't mind a one-night stand occasionally." Between Iris and some regular suitor from a much younger divorcee who worked nights, I found no need to beg, ignoring the new lady as much as possible. If she came in for fuel or food, it was strictly for business. No hello, no thank you, no kiss my ass, nothing but business. I kept the old Dodge pickup and most of the early gas pumps, which took up a lot of my time in the evenings when I was restoring them. Now that there were 3 more people working, I had a fair amount of free time, which I haven't had since how I discovered Dale. The next time she and I were in a situation where we had to be polite to each other and actually talk was at a church ice cream social. It was an old-fashioned idea, but they had been doing it for so long that it became what everyone expected. There were subscription sheets asking for volunteers. Like every other year, this year I felt I had time to donate and signed up for the "I'm needed everywhere" category. I was tasked with scooping ice cream from frozen cans. To my right, and clearly not happy about it, was none other than my nemesis, at least from her point of view, Alice Martin, whose job it was to apply the toppings when she wasn't trying to piss me off. Glaring at me fiercely, she grinned. "I guess we need to be polite if we're going to work together." I didn't say anything and looked away. An hour or more passed when it was finally over. I was at the bottom of the 3rd jar of vanilla, at the bottom of the 2nd jar of chocolate, and halfway through the 1st jar of strawberries when she spoke. Before that, I didn't say a word. Looking at me, Alice said, "Wow, we ate a lot of ice cream and we still have 2 hours to go." I said nothing, staring into space. She snorted. "Nothing to say? Don't you think it's interesting how much ice cream we've made so far?" I shrugged. "It's an ice cream party? What did you think we were going to serve? Peach pie?" Alice was fuming. I swear there was smoke coming out of her ears. At the end, I was cleaning up my area when I overheard her talking to the priest's wife. I don't know how I got stuck. Working with Mr. Casanova of all people, I have enough problems in my life to raise a daughter on my own without having to work with the city player. I wonder what marriage number he was in before moving here. Mrs. Franklin looked at her sternly. "We're talking about Dale, the same Dale who moved to this town and brought with him the idea of opening a gas station convenience store? The same Dale who never married and, of course, isn't the #1 skirt lover in town? Is this the one?" Alice stuttered and seemed at a loss for words, so Mrs. Franklin continued, "No, honey. The #1 skirt hunter in town is the man you work for in the forestry department. Have you ever wondered why he's like that? Is friendly and supportive of your ideas, That's because he plans to work his way into your life and eventually into your bed. But you just keep blaming Dale for your discomfort and loneliness. He's not your problem, but then maybe you already know that, as the Bible says, you protest too much. With that, she wished Alice a good day and left to find her husband. I didn't look in her direction or give Alice any sign that I had heard a word of their conversation. I finished cleaning and walked down the street to the store. I said hello to people along the way. I was happy that I moved to Longwood. It truly became my home when I pulled into the parking lot. I noticed Alice was gassing up the car while her daughter was playing with the windshield washer scraper, trying to clean the windows. I laughed to myself as I walked through the door. Evelyn, the girl who worked at the pizzeria, was there alone and asked if I could cover the cash register while she peed. When I asked why she was alone, she told me that young Susan had gone home with a stomach ache, which meant she had started her period. When Alice came in, she glared at me. That day we were giving each child a suction cup, so I offered one to her daughter. I was really surprised when she let her take it. She looked at me, expecting change. I think I owe you an apology of sorts. I mistook you for someone else. I nodded. Yes, that's right. Apology accepted. Her face tensed. You don't have to be so nasty about it. I didn't back down. In case you haven't noticed, Miss Martin, this is a two-way street. You've been doing nothing but pissing in my cereal since you first bought gas here. Most of the time, you're not polite enough to say please or thank you. So, Miss Martin, who exactly is behaving disgustingly? Looking at the counter, Alice took the change from my hands, stole a glance at me, took her daughter's hand and muttered, "Thank you," loud enough for me to clearly hear, and walked away. As she left, I said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You're welcome." By then, Evelyn had returned. "Why are you letting this woman get on your nerves? You two are like third graders fighting at recess. You both need to get over yourselves. Do you need help, or am I on my own?" I grabbed her chin with my hand. "Get your sweet ass back to the pizzeria where you belong." She laughed and slapped my hand. "You're incorrigible, you know that?" I really liked Evelyn. She was in her late 30s, had 3 kids, and her husband drove a logging truck. They were simple, nice people, no hidden agendas, no ulterior motives. You saw who they were. Like most residents of the city, ordinary people, there was, of course, drama, but not of the urban type. It didn't take long to realize that the worst thing about being in a small town was that everyone knew you. But that was also the best thing about being in a small town. Everyone knew you and cared about you. I stayed in Longwood long enough to realize the third phase of the business. There was no auto mechanic in town as such. He was more of a sledgehammer mechanic. Only the most desperate turned to it for anything. Otherwise, it was one of the large cities nearby. The elevators in the 2 service bays were still working. They just needed to be tested and certified. I bought a decent tire change station and balancer at auction. Then I found a retail tire store in Lake Junction that would sell me tires wholesale plus 5%. Wanting to leverage local talent as much as possible, I reached out to an auto mechanic instructor at Lake Junction Technical School in search of a top-of-the-class student. Luckily for me, it was a guy who lived 6 miles from Longwood. I call him a kid. He was 27 and had served in the Air Force for 4 years, working in a car park. He attended a technical school to obtain state certification. Given that he would graduate in 6 weeks, I hired him on the spot. Having been married for several years and his wife for 7 months, he was thrilled to have a job so close to home. One thing I knew for sure, with a wife and child on the way, he would be on time for work every day. When you have such responsibilities, you don't often go to parties. The irony of his hiring was unknown to me for the first 2 months. While he was working in the store, I noticed that he was selling new tires to Alice Martin and made a stupid offhand remark to her. He looked at me strangely, but continued working. At the end of the day, he knocked on my office door. "Hey, boss, what don't you like about Alice? I was surprised by your comment." "Oh, she's a little stuck up, at least to me. Do you know her?" He grinned. "You could say that. She's my wife's sister." I wasn't sure what to say. Oh shit, I should have kept my mouth shut. "So she's your baby's aunt?" "Sorry." "No need to apologize. Alice can be obnoxious, that's for sure. She's had to deal with a shitty situation ever since she got pregnant. I was the only one who was surprised at that moment. Where is the husband? Why doesn't he at least take care of his daughter? Oh, you thought she was married? No, a college professor knocked her up and then got a comfortable job teaching at a Taiwanese university. It takes two to tango, so it's not entirely her fault. But she was left to raise Amber alone. Her father never even hasn't seen his daughter. And if Alice has a say, he'll never do it. I wished Andrew good night and told him not to bring our conversation to Alice. I needed to rethink everything. Maybe I misunderstood her. Maybe I wasn't as kind to her as she was to me. She was attractive, had a beautiful body, and a beautiful smile when she allowed it. Under the right circumstances, we could get along. I saw her at a gas station 2 weeks later on a Friday night. Thinking that I could try to melt the ice, I asked how the new tires worked, giving me a look that said, "Are you a fucking idiot?" They do what tires are supposed to do, like in the song Wheels on the Bus, they spin and spin. Should they have been doing something else? I was angry, really angry. If Iris hadn't intervened and bid her good night, I probably would have jumped over the counter and strangled that stuck-up bitch. Man, she got me. Turning around, placing her hands on my chest, holding me down, she looked up with a frown on her face. What the hell is wrong with you? Why do you let her get to you? Ignore her, take her damn money, and scream next. Don't play her little games back and forth. You lose every time. I did my best to hold it in. I know Iris, but Alice drives me nuts every damn time I see her. Hell, of all places, she couldn't even be hospitable at a church function. Since there was no one else in line, Iris pushed me away from the counter, pinning me against the wall. What you really need is to make love. Come after 7. I finish at 6. This will give me time to get myself in order and be ready for a pleasant evening. My bed hasn't been warmed up for a couple of months. I need some kind of secluded corner, like you. Iris had used the word mommy many times in the bedroom, but never in public until that moment. When Iris left at 6, the night shift people were there and I went to my house, showered and changed, then went to hers. Home. It had been some time since we had enjoyed each other, and I was looking forward to long, ecstatic sex. We didn't waste any time. We got straight to the point and had good sex. Her grandchildren were supposed to arrive in the morning, so I rushed out of the house around 5 to make it to the station just before it opened. Usually Evelyn opened and turned on the ovens to the desired temperature. She came from behind, like me, and slapped me on the back with a malicious grin. Is Iris boring you, or is it someone new? Oh, don't look at me like that. What makes you think everyone in town doesn't know you two date from time to time? I have to admit, you're more fun to be around when you have sex regularly. You should find a girlfriend, or better yet, a wife. The fall hunting season was in full swing. The station and diner were full of hunters every morning. During the 2 months of fall bow hunting, followed by 10 days of bow hunting season, we sell more baked goods, coffee, breakfast sandwiches, and pizza than the rest of the year. We're also a registry location, so we see more than half of the deer harvested, which usually means more coffee, beer, and pizza to celebrate. I was in and out of the building so often that I didn't notice if Alice stopped for fuel or groceries. Somehow she didn't come into my sight. That is, until the last day of deer hunting season. I was weighing a good CZ buck when she approached me. You should be ashamed. What did that deer do that made you want to kill it? Another unpleasant situation when I wanted to punch this stupid fool in the nose. First of all, it wasn't me who shot. It was that 16-year-old guy next to the truck, and this is probably the proudest moment of his life so far. Why are they shooting at them, you ask? Because if you don't take them away, the disease quickly takes over the herds and destroys them. It's better to deal with it through controlled hunting than to let them suffer. Have you ever heard of chronic wasting disease? Of course not. So why don't you run out and find some sycophants with whom you can sympathize? Did I mention that this woman is driving me crazy? Turning on her heel, Alice grabbed the little girl's hand as she stomped off to her car, flipping me the bird as she went. I clearly heard her daughter scolding her, "Mom, this is a bad thing." I chuckled to myself as I walked back inside from the cold wind. Iris looked at me with her puppy dog eyes. "Are you going out of your way to piss her off?" Good God, you two are incredible. Either give her the salami or leave it alone. Being the smartass that I am, I replied. She started it. Iris smacked my ass as I walked by. Not a friendly slap, more like a spanking slap. Yeah, it's a grown-up thing to do, blaming someone else. Nobody said you have to argue with her, you just can't help it, can you? My 3-year-old grandson sometimes acts more mature than you. It was starting to be one of those days when you're a bug and not a windshield. It wasn't even 9 in the morning and I had already angered the client and Iris. Yes, this will be one of those days. Crap. I resigned myself to staying outside to register the deer before I screwed up anything else, as there would be a lot of registration on the last day before heading home. It was just after 7 when I dressed the last deer. I was hungry, cold, and in need of beer. To my utter surprise, Iris was waiting for me in my small, economical apartment with a hot meal and a cold beer. You look like you need a soldier in the wings. I hope the venison stew is good. Teddy Marin brought some meat and tenderloin this afternoon. They should be nice and tender by now. Sit down. Let me feed you. Once I was warmed up, she asked if I wanted some physical attention. Who am I to refuse such a beautifully worded offer? It wasn't a fuss with heavy breathing and bodies touching. It was slow and gentle, 2 people pleasuring each other, satisfying the other's physical needs. We finished, cleaned up, Iris left, and I fell asleep at 9:30. Being outdoors all day definitely promotes good sleep. My brainchild was making pretty good progress leading up to and during the holidays. Hunters have been replaced by snowmobilers and cross-country skiers. A different crowd, but they spent the same amount of money as the hunters. While waiting for them to arrive, I ordered a small selection of wines and a few exotic cheeses. The only people complaining about the limited selection were the ultra-arrogant ones. I did not care. I took their money with a smile on my face, laughing all the way to the bank. Due to the large number of people in the city, there has also been a surge in car repairs. They drove for as many hours as they wanted and discovered that something was wrong with their car. Andrew was working overtime almost every evening and weekend, and he finally came over and asked if I would consider hiring someone else to help fill in the gaps. If I had someone to sell and install tires, change oil, and just tune up, I'd have plenty of time to do everything else without having to work every weekend. My little girl took her first steps last Saturday, and I missed it. I can't keep doing this, Dale. I agreed and posted an ad online in Lake Junction looking for help with classifieds. 2 mornings later, a woman in a 1950s Ford pickup parked outside and walked in. I'm looking for an owner. I want to get a job as a mechanic. Iris was on the counter. I stepped aside and took inventory. I couldn't be left without chocolate bars. I looked up when the door rang. She was of average height, average build, blue-black hair braided in a long braid going down her back. It was obvious that she was someone who had grown up on the reservation, pretty as anyone would look, easy to look at. Iris pointed to me and took care of the next client. Holding out my hand to her as she approached, I took it in mine. Nice firm handshake, I like it. Her hands weren't soft and sticky. There are greasy stains on the fingers that disappear over time. Stepping back, she smiled one of her cautious smiles. Good morning. My name is Shining Star. White people call me Star. I would like to apply for a mechanic position. I am SAE certified and can start working as soon as you want. I thought for a second, reached for her hand again, and turned it over, studying it carefully before letting go. Come sit with me. I'll buy you some coffee. One of the pizza girls heard me and asked what kind of coffee she preferred. Black straight. Looking at her, I saw that her forearms were heavily stained with ink, but only because her sleeves were rolled up above the cuff. You say you have a certificate, and I don't doubt it. But what makes you think you want to work in a small store like ours? I've been working at Northland Chevrolet since I left the technical department 6 years ago. I'm not on the reservation, and I'm used to opening a place instead of the city. I mostly changed the oil, tires, did minor tune-ups and the like. 2 things were against it, so I could do more, even though they denied it. I'm a woman, and I'm from a reservation. They used to call me a squaw. I'm not sure I can promise you anything more challenging if you work here. It's a nicer atmosphere than you described, and there's some overtime. If I hire you, when could you start? Without the slightest hesitation, she answered, Monday. This got me thinking, what about 2 weeks' notice? I won't need it. Friday is my last day. I was tired of the owner's nephew hitting on me and making sexual remarks all the time, so I started carrying a digital voice recorder in my pocket. When I thought I had enough evidence to cut him off myself, I contacted management. They fired not only him, but also me, saying that I was toxic and caused a commotion in the store. So, if you can clearly see how to hire me, I will come on Monday. Anytime you say, I won't ask for references, but could you bring me a copy of your certificates? If so, be here by 7. Come with me. I'll introduce you to Andrew. We had just entered the store when Andrew stopped what he was doing and walked towards us, smiling all the way. They extended their arms and hugged each other tightly. Star, I'm so glad to see you. How long has it been? 6? 7 years? Hey, Andrew, at least 7, maybe more. Hey, is your grandpa still alive? He taught us a lot about cars. Dale, you won't believe her grandpa's name. His name is Jonathan Kills 10 Men. No shit, he didn't kill anyone, but someone in his family did that a long time ago. My senior year of high school, I worked with him and Shining Star at his auto body shop in High Ridge. Have you applied for the position? I did it, and I'll start on Monday when I bring my certificate. Yes, Grandpa is still alive, still tinkering and showing up at the workshop several times a week at the age of 96. He'll probably die with a wrench in his hand. When word got out that Dale had 2 full-time mechanics, we started recruiting from all over the county, because being in the middle meant people didn't have to drive 40 miles for service, oil changes, or tire changes. Some log haulers asked if I would hire a diesel mechanic and offer truck service. After talking to Andrew and Star, we decided that this was too specialized a venture and we should let it pass. They still bought most of their fuel from me, so it wasn't a total loss. With everything going on, I didn't pay much attention to whether Alice was around or not. One evening, I was in the short hallway of my apartment, watching the comings and goings for a few minutes, when I saw her walk in with some guy. They seemed awfully friendly and familiar with each other. They weren't holding hands, but they were definitely used to being together. An elderly lady named Rachel, who only wanted to work in the evenings, was on duty that evening. I asked if she knew who this guy was. Oh yeah, I know him. His name is Kevin. I had him in 3rd grade. A snotty, bossy kid. His late father was the president of the old Lake Junction Community Bank before it closed. The guy thought the city, they own it. He went off to college and came back to start a real estate business with a huge loan from his dad's bank. He sold enough real estate to pay off the loan, but he hasn't been doing so well the last 4 or 5 years. I found myself thinking, why would that be? The real estate market seems to be pretty strong right now. Oh, that's right. Unless you're just trying to sell recreational properties, once Kevin paid off the loan, he decided he wasn't going to focus on anything other than luxury properties. He has several shares worth over $1 million. As far as I know, he's only sold 3 properties in the last 2 years, and while the commissions are high, you can't live on them forever. No, I think your Mr. Kevin is in for a rude awakening. I walked away, wondering if Alice knew what she was getting into with a relationship like this. At the same time, I was glad that she found someone she wasn't constantly annoying. I found myself drawn to Star. I didn't pine for her or drool all over her. I just found her attractive and easy to be around. On Friday, when the store closed for the day, I returned to the office where she was finishing up the invoices. Hey, Star, I wanted to ask you something. Would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night? It can be casual or casual, whichever you prefer. She looked at me for a few moments before speaking. I'm not sure this is a good idea, Dale. You're a great employer. I like my job. You've been nothing but nice to me, but I'm not sure we should date. Why? Is there something wrong with me? Am I too old for you? Age isn't a problem. You're beautiful, and your belly doesn't hang over your belt, so it's not a problem. I shrugged. The places I visit are mostly Indian, and there aren't many white people. I'm not sure you'd be comfortable. I was an alcoholic when I was 14 and gave it up, so I don't drink. To be completely honest with you, I'm not looking for someone to crawl between my legs. That's not what I want right now. I was a little like, okay, I can respect that. Thanks for being honest. Have a great weekend. The more I thought about it over the weekend, the more I felt like I had to try again. I wasn't necessarily looking for a fuck buddy. If I was desperate, I knew women who would fit the role for a night or two. I was looking for someone to build a relationship with and see where it would take us. Yeah, I was going to post it and see if she might change her mind. Full of ambitious expectations, I returned to the service bays after the Monday morning rush. Star waved at me, as did Andrew. Star had her car on a lift for an oil change, and I went underneath and asked her to come to my office when she was done with her business. A look of concern appeared on her face. I assured her that everything was fine. I just needed to talk to her. Sometime later, there was a knock on my door, followed by Star. Open the door a crack, Star. Yes, leave it open an inch or so. I'd like to get back to the conversation on Friday. What if I didn't expect you to drink, or go to places where you're uncomfortable, or try crawling between your legs, as you say? Would you agree to invite you to dinner? You could almost see the wheels turning in her brain. As much as I like you and the job here, I'm willing to quit and go somewhere else if dating you is a requirement for a long-term job. And it's not about you. Dale, I'm just not ready for a relationship. I'm sober, drug-free, have a good job, and don't want a boyfriend at this point in my life. I was disappointed, but I understood even more when she continued. I told you that I was an alcoholic teenager and smoked a lot of marijuana. When my mom died, I was put into foster care. She was a white lady, but she was kind and truly cared about me. She helped me get sober, quit weed, got me into tech school, and even helped me get my first job. I lived with her until I got that job. This is the first time I was on my own. I love this feeling of independence. Sorry, Dale. There is currently no man in my future, including you. But you'll still work for me, won't you? I don't want to lose you as an employee. We can be friends, I think. There are a lot of ladies. It just so happens that I'm attracted to you, but if you're in the wrong mood, so be it. I extended my hand to shake hers. Friends. Star smiled as she stood up to shake my hand. Friends. Thank you for supporting me and understanding. It's time for me to get back. There's still a lot to do. I spent a short season in this state. I saw Alice from time to time. We were still barely polite to each other, but at least we weren't in constant arguments anymore. As the weeks went by, she was with Kevin, what's-his-name, less and less, which made me wonder if our relationship had fallen apart. With the arrival of spring, fishermen and their bored wives began to appear on a regular basis, many of whom wanted male companionship to replace their husbands who ignored them. I stayed away from young married women who were either looking for one last fling before settling down and becoming a mom, or who wanted revenge, sex to even the score at the table after discovering that Mr. Perfect had cheated. They were too trusting and frivolous. I was afraid to ruin their marriage. What surprised me most was the number of older women looking for a little fun on the side. They were not disappointed by their passion and were not looking for a new lover. They already had one. They sought a roll in the hay to ease their sexual frustrations, while Bubba and his buddies sat on the water, drinking beer and fishing every free minute. Their ages ranged from 40-somethings and older. One was 62, the most energetic 62-year-old woman I had ever met. Her husband rented a cabin for 2 weeks and was on the lake from sunrise to sunset, while his wife was in bed with me every other day. I loved her confidence and sense of who she was. There were no hidden agendas with her. He was up north to go fishing. She was up north for some time on the side if that presented itself. She was a sexy little thing, unlike most ladies her age who wear what they call comfortable, supportive underwear. She was the epitome of sex and sparkle. On the outside, she was wearing blue jeans and a loose blouse or sweater. Underneath, she was, "Take me home and pick me up," in every sense of the phrase. Sometimes she wore a girdle and stockings, Other days she didn't. Always thin, sheer bras that tended to highlight her withered flesh towards the center, creating a lot of cleavage. I thought her breasts would sink and sag. As I watched her take off her bra for the first time, to my delight, they sagged but remained protruding. She was as lively in sex as in life itself. I was really sad when she told me they were leaving the next day. It was a great 7-day run, and at the time I was hoping for the same thing next spring. I was at the diner in late June when Alice and her daughter walked in. It was full of people. I indicated with my hand that the 2 chairs opposite were free. She nodded and headed in my direction. As she approached me, I began to wonder why I did this. We had never done anything but disagree, and yet I willingly invited her to sit with me. Alice politely sat down and introduced her daughter Angel. I thought it was weird to name the baby Angel, but later realized it was a pretty common name. When my dish arrived, Lydia, the hostess and our waitress, looked at me strangely as she was ready to order. Knowing that Alice and I were polar opposites, she was probably worried that we might fight before the food was ready. Her daughter chatted on, as 7-year-olds do, and when she got to the point where she didn't like Mr. Kevin, her mother quickly intervened. "Darling, we don't talk about people. It's rude." "But Mom, he treats me badly." I gave Alice a funny look, as if asking, what is she talking about? "Kevin isn't very good with kids. It can be difficult at times. We get along wonderfully when it's just him and me. It'll take a while, but things will work out." I wasn't looking for a fight, but I needed to say something. My mother often said that the way a man treats his child is ultimately the same as how he will treat his wife. Not trying to start a fight, just, I'm telling you what she said before. "Thanks, I'll keep that in mind." "Oh, look, there's a table available. We'll hurry there. Have a nice day." As I was leaving, a tall brunette came in. I stepped aside, holding the door for her, and halfway there she stopped and looked at me. Not quite sure what to do, I stood there when she spoke and immediately knew who it was. "Is that you, Dale Schilling?" I smiled. "Betty Zindar, what a coincidence. How are you doing? We should probably stop blocking the doorway. Come have coffee with me." I asked how her husband was doing, why she was up north, how long she planned to stay, all the usual things. While talking to her, I noticed that Alice was looking in our direction while she was eating. It made me wonder why she obviously didn't care about me in any sense. Gerald is not here. In fact, he is not in my life at all, now sharing a cell with Bubba, the god of love. When the young girl he was checking out for sporting reasons told her mother what had happened, it became obvious that I wasn't the only one he gave free breast exams to. The consequences were violent. 11 other girls came forward. He ended up going to prison for a very long time. What about his position as a surgeon and the clinic? Working at the hospital as a junior sergeant, I found myself in the middle of things. I ended up quitting, selling the clinic, and cashing out everything we owned. I divorced him and decided to leave. Fortunately, we never had children. Tell me, you knew that some of the equipment you sold to the hospital was still there, even after the renovation 2 years ago? The guy who replaced you was a jerk. He completely lost it. Reaching out and touching my arm, she asked, "What about you? What brings you to this diner?" "I live here. I own and operate Dale's DX down the street." "Oh my God," I stopped there for gas. "I love how you decorated the interior with all the memorabilia. It must have cost a fortune to get all of it. It's all original." As Alice walked by, I caught her ugly look. I wondered what was wrong. We had barely said 10 polite words to each other since she arrived at Longwood over a year ago. To tell you the truth, Betty, they were all in the back of the building when I bought it. All I did was remove them. The DX sign is original too. I added stains to the post so it would be visible at night. You won't believe it. How many people want to buy these products at ridiculous prices? An old Coke machine in the back. The guy offered me $2,000. He was admittedly a little drunk, but if I said yes, he would buy it. How long are you planning to stay? Have you rented a cabin at the resort? Lydia returned to her food. and as she placed it on the table, Betty said, "Thank you, Lydia." Now I was completely confused. "How do you know Lydia?" "Because I bought this place last Thursday. I'm the new owner. The name will stay, and so will all the people. Just a new owner." Lydia agreed to stay for 6 months, but everyone else wants to stay a long time. I grinned and looked down, then up again. I knew Lydia had it on the market, but I didn't know it got any response. Well, we kept it a secret until everything could be sorted out. I'm 41, and I'm tired of being on my feet for 12-hour shifts, not to mention the shift part, which gets boring very quickly. I started working in the ambulance shortly after. I've seen enough sass and blood to last me a lifetime. My grandparents had a place near High Ridge that got me thinking about moving north, and here I am. Keep in mind, I don't know anything about the restaurant business, but Lydia and the others do. I'll learn from them. It was nice to talk and fun to meet an old friend. Betty was a beautiful woman in the 5'9" to 5'10" range, with long, natural brown hair and a slim figure, but not skinny. Overall, she was, as some would say, average. She would never be on the cover of a fashion magazine, but neither would 99% of the rest of humanity. I've always enjoyed talking to her in the past. As I was about to leave, she stopped me. "You were one of the good guys, Dale. You never hit on any married women, which was not the case with most salespeople. The entire nursing staff spoke of you in a favorable light." Over the next month, we saw each other more often. I ate at the diner more often. Betty showed up at the store to watch TV and hung out with me 2 or 3 nights a week. We were becoming cautiously friendly. Neither of us wanted to be the first to make a move. The chemistry was present, but who would be the first to act on it? After about 2 months, we became quite comfortable and kissed from time to time. I was quite happy with the direction my life was going when, out of the blue, Alice decided to come back into my life. It was like a nagging cough that just wouldn't go away forever. I worked the night shift. There were a few minutes left before closing, and the car drove into the fuel pumps. I thought it was no big deal. I'll close a few minutes later, but a sale is a sale. The car looked familiar, but I didn't recognize it. That is, until a little girl with brown hair got out of the passenger side and looked toward the building. 30 seconds later, her mother came out from the driver's side. My body tensed, and my mind prepared for a verbal confrontation. I could have avoided Alice for weeks, and here she was, as if the day hadn't been bad enough for me to have to deal with this woman. It had been an incredibly shitty day before Alice showed up at the last minute. The pump computer has failed. It took over 2 hours to get everything back up and running. Just as we were sorting out this mess, Evelyn told me that one of the pizza ovens had broken down and the repairman wouldn't be able to get to us until the next day. Just when I thought the morning couldn't get any worse, the entire city was left without power for over an hour. They blamed it on a squirrel, but I'm not sure what that has to do with it. Once the substation was back online, power was restored, which meant we had to reset everything. Betty wisely closed the doors to her diner as soon as the power went out and never opened it again. She came to the station after dinner to see how I was doing. I heard her call one of the girls from the pizzeria and tell them to take care of the registers while I took a short break. In my small apartment, we sat and talked, or should I say it was me who grumbled while Betty listened. She finally raised her hand to stop me. "I'm going to go home for a while, get away from your problems, and be back in time for closing time." From then until this point, the rest of the night went smoothly. The last thing I needed was an argument about who knew what was wrong with Alice. Walking through the door to pay, she burst into a smile. "Hi, how are you?" "Long time no see," and a lot of other nonsense. I was on guard, and I was ready to verbally express it. I asked about her boyfriend, and she chuckled. "Kevin isn't my boyfriend, never has been. We dated for a while, but that's it. I was thinking maybe you and I should go out somewhere soon." I was about to tell her, "No, thank you," when the door opened. Betty came in. She smiled at me and nodded politely to Alice, who took the change and touched my hand with hers. Instinctively, I pulled away, wondering what the hell was going on. That's when Alice spoke again. "Then maybe we can call it a date. I'll call you and tell you what time to pick me up tomorrow night." I sat up straighter. No one was talking about a date. You were the one who mentioned that we should go out. I never responded. You see, Alice, I'm happy with the way my life is, and I don't want any of your drama. Maybe you should go back to Kevin." Her mouth was slightly open. Alice was spitting and sputtering, trying to find what to say. Betty stood next to me and grinned like the cat that ate the canary as she spoke quietly. "Good night, Alice. Drive carefully." Everyone else left, and it was just Betty and me left. I locked the door, turned off the light, and pointed to the door to my apartment. Betty nodded and walked ahead of me. Once inside, she turned around and kissed me as her body pushed into mine. "Is this door locked?" she asked. "Of course. Why such a question?" "Because it's obvious that we both suffer from the same disease. No sense of humor. I'm a big girl, you're a big boy. Neither of us are new, and it's obvious that we feel something for each other. Let's stop circling over the airport and land this plane. In other words, make love to me." I wasted no time in locking the door, turning off the lights in the apartment so that only the outside light was softly shining through the curtains, taking her into my arms and kissing her as passionately as I could. When I pulled away, Betty grabbed me by the neck from behind, pulling me to her lips. Stepping back, she began to unbutton her blouse as I stood there, mesmerized by her natural beauty. She didn't need a push-up bra or anything. Everything was natural and just waiting for me to caress her. Unclasping her bra, she hissed, "Take off your clothes." When the bra hit the floor, the two cones were perfectly shaped, pointing straight at me. No sagging, no sagging. I was in my underwear when Betty slipped out of her jeans. She was sitting on the bed to take them off when I put my hands on hers. "Stop, let me do it. Lay back, let me worship your body." We took our time, enjoyed each other, talked quietly, and kissed a lot. I could hear her quietly muttering and asking what Betty was saying. "That's so good, Dale. My ex has never been so affectionate." We made tender love. When I lay down, she moved closer to me, wrapping her arms around me. "Hold me, Dale. He would never do that." We lay there for an hour or more, discussing our situation. It was clear that we enjoyed each other and wanted to stay together. Since she had a house, we decided that I would move in with her. We didn't run away and get married. Instead, we stayed together for about 16 months before tying the knot and heading to Fiji for our 2-week honeymoon. After all these years, we still live in the tiny community of Longwood. We own the diner and Dolls DX, but we no longer work for them. We have people hired to do those tasks. Alice? Things went from not too good to very bad. She allowed Kevin to persuade her to invest all her savings in his business, which went bankrupt less than a year later. She lost everything, including Kevin, who left immediately after the business went bankrupt. Alice and Angel eventually moved to a place where Alice could get better compensation. I felt sorry for her, but then again, she never listened to reason. Last I heard, Angel was a freshman in college, and her mother had a live-in boyfriend. Our long-term plans are to stay where we are. We renovated and expanded my grandfather's hunting lodge where it all started many years ago. Betty and I spend most of our time sitting on the porch or in the boat fishing for bluegill and walleye. Andrew mentioned buying me out. Who knows, maybe I will accept his offer. Star eventually met and married the perfect guy for her. They live on the reservation, where she and her husband own a full-service gas station with their 2 sons. I never in my life imagined that a trip to my grandfather's cabin all those years ago could lead to a happy, fulfilling life. But it did, and I have no regrets about ever leaving the thriving town I once called home. No, my place is in Longwood. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.